see the tower.
But it's a very good view, and so we're very lucky to be here in the centre of Manchester.
Great.
And what a day it is to be in Greater Manchester with the news, which we're already talking about here, of Andrew Gwynn's going to stand down, which may or may not be a bit of a surprise for Keir Starmer and a lot of people in the Labour Party. It has, of course, a great impact on the devolution agenda, and our conversation today is really about that devolution revolution and asking a very important question: is it alive and kicking? The reason I ask that is because I'm very long in the tooth, and I've been around since John Prescott days and before in terms of thinking that having devolved power moved to the people was rather a good idea. So far we've got it rather wrong. It does seem, as Chris said, it's a very exciting agenda, but what worries me is I don't think people are very excited about it. So the conversation I think we want to have today is to put some of this in context with what is devolution for? That's a question I've been asking some of our mayors. What is it good for? What does it do? So we can actually change the narrative. But also looking at where we are. So 2025, again, I've got a New Year theme here. 2025, I think, was quite an interesting year because not only did we have a Labour government, but we did have some real fire in our belly. Excuse me, those people who didn't notice, but there was something around devolution called the English Devolution and Empowerment Bill. And this piece of legislation is pretty fundamental, big picture stuff around a framework for the future of devolution. There was no sort of much, there wasn't, I wouldn't say, there wasn't even a plot, I think, in terms of the media recognition of this great piece of landmark legislation. People may remember when George Osborne announced his plans for devolution at the just in Manchester, and a big, I don't think anybody, including myself, remember where the devolutional plans for the English devolution were launched by Angela Rayner. Obviously, 2025 was a funny old year. I think we started off with that whole thing around devolution. It's going to be real. This time it's going to happen. What could possibly go wrong? Pressing that button for that bill was really significant. You had a feeling that the Labour Party were going to deliver change, and that devolution was going to be the agency of change. And because of those feelings. So we've seen, I think, in the last 18, 20 months, quite a journey, really. I mean, we're heading towards potentially a midterm May elections in 2026, which obviously there's been a lot of concern and worry about what that actually means. But we started off with that, and then we met reality. Something happened, I don't know what happened, but the shift towards populism, it could have been Donald Trump or whatever, but this whole rhetoric, having a massive majority, and then this great wedge coming in the middle. And then we've got fragmentation of reform rising. We've got the Devo plan, and democracy wasn't quite going. We weren't going on the crest of the wave. We literally did go top. There's lots of analysis, and I'm interested today to really explore what went wrong. And it will be the talk of many academics and commentarians for many moons to come to say, how did that happen? What is the seismic change done? How can you go from literally hero to zero in such a short space of time? Meanwhile, there have been other, this populism thing. So then where do we go from here? We fear this anxiety coming from the centre, but actually people aren't feeling change. How do we turn that all around? Now, what we've also seen is that because of that fear, maybe, I'm giving you my view, because of that fear, maybe because we could end up with a reform mayor in the south, in those 4 mountains, which were going to the election in May. So they're not happening. Now my view, as a born but not necessarily bred Northerner, but I'm back here now, is that when you slow things down, or things don't happen when they're meant to, maybe a commission will be held, or we're slowed down. So there's really exciting potential to change how we're governed. And now we're in a situation, well, is that happening? Equally, on the local government election, is it 29? Said, well, we're not ready, we're not going to go forward. There is a fear, if not anxiety, and I would say also sort of lack of paralysis in the both major parties about where we go. And I fear that devolution, which I do believe, because that's what we say on the tin, is the agency of change, Devo, is that is where you are going to get a change and delivery. So I really think it's really an interesting topic to do. We can't forget politics. And what I've been talking to Sarah, to Jonathan, whatever, for many moons, really, is how we keep devolution and good devolution working, because it should be more popular and more recognition. But we've got something different in this country which doesn't exist anywhere else. We don't have a federal system. We're not really engaged. We don't understand really what the difference is between X, or working for the local council, district council, who's in charge of the health service, who does social care, who doesn't like it, who doesn't potholes, what the mayor is for, and what they're good for, is still part of the narrative. So the Devo agency, what we're talking about all the time, is about how we keep that narrative going, people understand. I don't expect people to be going, devolution is great, but I do expect to be able to talk about growth, change, delivery, and being able to see in plain sight that it's made a difference. And people sort of say, well, I will, as they do in most other major cities, say, I'm going to vote for the mayor, including London, I would say. But another thing I'm also getting is low turnout on elections, and is that how do we get people more excited? And because this could be the answer to the reform question. If people were really excited about devolution and voting for mayor, then they would get out of bed, perhaps vote more readily for that, and rather saying, yes, I can see results. But with this sort of horizon and sort of my predictions for the year, I think there's a lot of pressure on the Labour Party, as we've seen. I may be right or wrong about the paralysis or the anxiety. As a communications professional, I couldn't actually give it any awards for getting the message right. Like most others, people will be scratching their heads and saying, well, what is going wrong in government? We're talking today about that big question, is it alive and kicking? And I'm going to ask my esteemed and wonderful panelists of thought leaders, I think, and also in my company, they are devolutionistas in one form or another. So I will introduce them because that's what I'm meant to do. So Zoe Billingham, IPPR North, who again is a great stalwart of devolution, does great stuff for the IPPR, thought leader, and you can mention and do your own plug. But Zoe's great on this agenda, and before that, she actually succeeded. Another IPPR.
It's a small world, this
IPPR North.
Blimey.
The wonderful Sarah Longlands, who now works at the Centre of Local Economic Strategies, and she succeeded somebody called Neil McEnroy, who is again, who I adore because he...
Hang on, this isn't Neil.
No, I know. And he doesn't look at all, he's got no beard. But when he... I mean, one of the things about Neil, he was very, very worried about the Constitution, and also how we're all going to basically ruining the economy and all kinds of things, constitutional stuff. So, and people here will also remember that there was a big sort of Labour dream from Gordon Brown. So it's not that people haven't, ever tried to really think about this problem, and I think we have got an opportunity. So I really want to get into that a little bit. But Jonathan also from a wonderful think tank called Ocalis, and again, and also even your father. I met your father in a bar. No, I think you introduced me to him in a bar in London, and apparently he knows all about devolution. We had a good old chat. So anyway, it's one of those things that I know the people in this room get excited about it, but let's see, and the people at home also will be interested. So I'm not going to take any order. We are going to take some predictions. We're going to have fun. I want people to be provocative. I want people to be challenging. I'm going to bring you in at some point or not. So start thinking about it. We are being streamlined to an audience, and it will go out afterwards as well. So we've got a bigger audience than the one actually here. So you're very lucky that you're here. But I think we could be at the cusp today, because you'll say, I remember when Andrew Gwynn said he was going to stand down, and that opened up a huge oyster of opportunity or not. But let's not just focus on today's news, let's look at the bigger picture, because this does matter to ordinary people and the voting public. So the question is the devolution revolution alive and kicking? And I'm going to ask Zoe, because you're on my left. There's no reason, that's a reason to go first.
No comment. And I'm on the right.
And you're on the right, and we've got opportunity later. So yeah, so just to kick up, on picking up what I'm saying, that's a broad question, and I've got a whole list of other things that we're going to probe. So over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Jill, and to KPMG for hosting today. So I didn't realise I'd be put in the contrarian position of saying that actually I think devolution is alive and kicking, and actually I think the agenda on the whole, there are some strong political headwinds, as we know, coming up in May, but on the whole is going well. As Jill alluded to, the Devo bill currently going through Parliament has actually got hidden in there, maybe not communicated in the best way, but it has actually got some quite serious changes in there, whether that's rolling out devolution to the whole of England, deepening the offer to existing mayoral authorities, including integrated settlements, meaning they have more flexibility to spend within pools. I think that's really important. The right to request new powers for the first time. Votes at 16 is actually in the Devo bill too, so if you're not excited about Devo, you should be excited about young people getting the vote. And then, of course, better community governance through neighbourhood area committees, a long way to go on that, but at least it's in there. And the visitor levy, which was a pitch that IPPR North, along with our fellow localists, has been making for many years about giving, finally, some powers to mayors to raise their own funds, and we hope that's very much the beginning of the fiscal devolution journey. I'm sure we're going to get into some of those headwinds and some of the things pushing against the sort of Devo wins, but this bill, alongside Northern Powerhouse Rail, announced just last week, alongside the billions of pounds being put into communities through the pride of place funding, I think actually means we're in a very exciting place with Devo. Still a long way to go, and I hope the Devo bill is not the end of it, but I think actually Labour started well.
Excellent start. I think I'm not saying I'm one side or the other. I'm an optimist, because I think it must be a success.
It has to, yeah,
It
absolutely.
has to, and I don't think there's a case for it. So it is our job to keep that why it's good going. And I think that lack of the centre, again, is my problem, is wagging the dog. And then for me, there's a disconnect between the mayors and Parliament and Whitehall. So I think there's a funny old thing going on, and also it is a new landscape, because how local government reform, and actual, at the end of the day, this is about empowerment, and I think getting that out is really, understanding what it's for is really, really important. And you look most keen to answer essay question.
Well, so, punishment for bit-looking keen guess. Okay, is it alive or dead? That's the essay question. I surmise we've got like Schrodinger's devolution. It depends if you look at it. When you look at it, it might be alive, it might be dead. You really don't know. On the positive side, there has been a significant change in English local governance to support devolution in a relatively short period of time. So whether Andy Burnham stays or goes, you couldn't think about Manchester or Greater Manchester without Andy Burnham. That's a change. On the more negative side, in sort of civil service parlance, one gets the feeling that sort of devolution is doomed to success, as in you've got so many asymmetries to the devolution. For fans of sci-fi, it's like the Game of Thrones series, the script writers there introducing small changes to the characters which had huge impact in the books. You've had like 25 years of Scottish and Welsh devolution and the return of London strategic governance. 10 years ago, sort of George Osborne tried to blindside everyone by signing up with Sir Richard Lee's for Manchester's devolution with great excitement and fanfare, notably having failed to do it when he was Chancellor in the coalition from 20. Only at the 10 mayoral referendums, only the mad folk of Bristol elected their red trouser wearing architect, was it George Ferguson as the mayor?
Yeah.
The rest of the population refused them. So this wasn't done on a huge popular wave, but he did it nevertheless. And within England, you've got the asymmetries. In the north, it makes sense where you've got the former mayoral metropolitan counties naturally assuming the armour and the carapace of the combined authority with the passenger transport and all the other roles. And my dad wasn't a devolution expert, he was a civil service relocation expert. So when I was 7, I moved from the nondescript Surrey, Carshalton beaches to sunny Southport, the Lancashire coast, because he moved the health and safety executive from Southwark Bridge up to Bootle, or as it became known to the civil servants, Boot Hill, because they were such easy marks for the local mugging community. And so I'm approaching this as like when I was growing up in Southport, the very southerner I knew up in the north was Mike Baldwin in Coronation Street. And so I want to talk about the interdependencies, but northern devolution is powering ahead well. You've got cross-party, Steve Rotheram, Andy Burnham, Luke Campbell, having their little mates club, to see what they can do between each other. But in terms of political economy, there are strong interdependencies, and it's not kind of really working out in the south, is it? As in, you've got the devolution priority programme, which is essentially now an exercise in avoiding the voters lest they cast their ballots in the ways that's not acceptable. There's going ahead in Surrey, which is on my doorstep in southwest London. Now, there is not a clamour for a Surrey mayor, as in it doesn't have that popular appeal. I've advised sort of southeast councils, which is a group of mainly districts from, say, Oxfordshire down to Sussex. And look, in the north, you've got this, presumably because you've been screwed over by Whitehall and the Treasury system for so many years, there is a natural affinity to work together to defeat the system. You don't have that affinity, that alliance there between, say, Oxfordshire and so it really is a geographic expression. And so I think that's kind of and it sort of feeds into the whole dog's dinner of local government reorganisation. MHCLG wanted the devolution white paper. In exchange for this, well, the Treasury had to have their pound of flesh. So what did they want? The mythical PwC report, which the County Council's network paid for in exchange. And now what have you got? You've got the LGR, which is... but you've got to kick the tires on so many of these assumptions. Whether there's the capacity to get this done, what it's going to look like at the end, truth, nobody knows. But you certainly don't have the devolution quite yet. But what you do have, quite interestingly, Essex is a good example. Tom Walker, the great Whitehall warrior, co-author of the extremely literate Levelling Up white paper, he's got sort of 2 years without the fear of an Essex mayor of any shape or stripe to create a model combined authority in an exciting part of England, with an interesting geography and interesting economy. Ditto sort of Mark Rogers doing his flying Red-Adair thing in Sussex. So I think that how that fits together with the rest of the devolution, and just on the basis that our regional economies do have those interdependencies. So I'm convincing myself maybe it's not as bad as I made out at the beginning.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we will have reasons to be cheerful, but I also think it relies on everybody to keep talking it up and saying, and sort of saying it is happening, because I was at an event at Gatwick, or the Gatwick Economy, with our Devo South colleague, Jerry, who talking about that. And of course, it was exactly as you say, it was like, wow, what's happening? God, is this time next year? It was an element of surprise, and obviously I'm long in the tooth, and I'm there to present it as it's a really good thing and you should welcome it. So the idea that they're not ready, and the politics and the geography, which I always talk about, politics and geography is what slows things down, particularly in the northeast, for example. Even in Yorkshire, politics and geography very different, and now we've got a very different concept of a brand of Yorkshire with 4 mayors, not all Labour. So I think it's very interesting how it works. But yeah, I could say you're not ready. A lot of people will never be ready for that change. They want change, but maybe they don't see devolution as the vehicle of change, or the agency of change, because it's too entrenched in them. They may have heard of Andy Burnham, but they probably wouldn't have heard of many other people. And then the calibre of the mayors that actually put themselves forward, certainly in other areas. For example, in the west of England, I spoke to Helen Godwin at the Labour Party conference, and it's like very interesting. The southern impression of what's going on up here is really sort of like, rose-tinted glasses, and I said, it's just been so wonderful. We're learning so much from this great north. But the reality, I think, is different. I'm not being cynical, but I know, Sarah, you're dying to answer these questions.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's another word in there too, I think, when we're talking about devolution, which is about identity.
Yeah.
And I think I grew up in Northern Ireland, so I'm a northerner, but I'm from the north of Ireland, and so I understand north as a sense of identity, and as a sense of defining yourself by what you're often against, So there's a sort of a mindset about northernness and northern ideas, which I think is common to all places, and identity is often contested. Identity is often at the heart of that, and I think probably in the north, one of our big advantages, one of our big strengths, is not that we have one homogenous identity, but we are a collection of different understandings of what northernness is. If you go to Newcastle, I think they would probably think the south is Manchester. So I think that's interesting. But just to come back to the question, is it alive and kicking? I think it's alive. But at the minute, I'm reading The Wizard of Oz to my children. The original version, and to me, devolution reminds me a little bit of the Tin Man. It's got a body, but it's a bit clunky. There's rust on some of its joints, and it doesn't have heart. And I think for me, that missing heart is a massive issue, because when I talk about heart, I'm talking about the way in which devolution identifies with people's everyday lives. And I think that's absolutely missing at the minute from the devolution. And I think that is serious, because it threatens the whole project. If devolution is simply a vehicle for populism, then it's not going to work. It's not going to fulfil its promise. And I think that would be my concern with it. And when we look at the skyline, yes, there's a lot of growth, there's a lot of activity in Greater Manchester, but there's also really big questions about who's benefiting from that growth. And whether that growth is actually dealing with the challenges that Greater Manchester needs it to. So I think that's a challenge. And then a second issue is just about devolution itself and the structure. The original vision of devolution, I think, that's my view on it, when you read some of the original documentation which happened, way back in the times of John Prescott and even before that, Scottish, Welsh, Northern Irish devolution went first, and then there was this expectation that English devolution would follow, and of course it didn't, and it sort of slowly trickled along ever since. But the original vision of English devolution was one of federalism. And I think I would like to see much greater ambition when it comes to devolution, so that it's not just a decentralisation of power and resources, but it's actually looking at the constitution and thinking much more deliberately about how all the different pieces of our democracy fit together. So I think that's what I mean when I say the Tin Man. There's a lot of good stuff in there. There's a lot of good, working mechanisms, but it's still quite technical. And local government reorganisation is the most technical exercise you could imagine without really engaging with the people who are on the receiving end of those services. But it's quite technical, it's a bit rusty, it's a bit clunky, and as I say, it doesn't really have a heart when you think politically of what this project is hoping to achieve.
Yeah, I think there's a lot really from that opening statement. I'm pleased that you'll think it's not dead, because I know, and I would not pronounce it dead, of course, because it is alive, and we are in a situation, we do have legislation heading towards the statute book, and it was always, I think, from the architect's point of view, Jim McMahon, I would call him the architect on this one, is that it won't be perfect, but it's a start, and we will make it happen, whether they like it or not. And I think, he was apoplectic when the southern states or the southern Devo priority deals were slowed down, because it is a project, and that's what I'm sort of saying. We're used to projects in the north, or sort of projects from HS2 to now NPR. Clean power, a creative digital revolution. All of those things are great things that we can do. And that's why devolution is good. But once it slows down, I think that is a worry, as it was for George Osborne, because he thought he was going to get 36 or whatever it was Devo deals all signed up, and they didn't come forward because geography and politics largely, or they couldn't quite work out what it was for. It was all too soon, and then we ended up with what we have. With Andy Bird and Steve Brockman, and now we've got more. But we are creating this mighty, I think we're creating these mighty beasts at the minute, and that's one of the things I think we can talk about. It's this whole thing about empowerment as well. So do our mayors hold the keys to unlocking greater community empowerment? Because I think there's a bit of a distance potentially between what the mayors are doing, the MPs are doing, councillors are doing, local government are doing, and then what the people are feeling on the ground. I've just talked to a lot of MPs, we run all party parliamentary groups and Liverpool, Manchester, whatever, and it's really interesting, that sort of distance, I think, as they get bigger, more money, more funding. And then there is a missing thing, which was the subject of our last soiree, about accountability and governance. How does it all interrelate? Because Parliament is sovereign, the party, therefore, the leading party, the party is really important. Then you have a mayor that doesn't have the power, they have their own mandate. So picking up on your point really around, how do we get democracy working in the right way? We're picking up my theme, how do we actually get people feeling it and wanting it and get that engagement is I think what will either make it go forward or not.
Absolutely. I think, I'd say two things here. I think we've got to use devolution, as we said, it's got to work. So we've got to then use it to create a moment of democratic renewal, and I don't say that lightly. I think there's been a big muddying of the waters over the years between what an MP does, what a councillor does, and now what a mayor does. And this is for me, let's use this opportunity to redefine and reshape that. I think MPs have become far too involved in very local issues. I understand the politics and the draw of wanting to do that, but at the same time, important legislation is going through Parliament, which I think is being under-scrutinised by the body of MPs. And actually, their job, they are legislators. That's what they're there to do, to scrutinise, to legislate, and to debate in Westminster. And I think they should absolutely be freed up by devolution to do that, and then let the local councillors and let the mayors get on with the stuff of local and regional development. And then I think that will then start to create a bit of clarity in what is a very murky system at the moment. If I may just pick up on your second point on community, I think that's totally essential, and that's why I alluded to the kind of neighbourhood area panels, very wonky name that's currently in the Devo bill, and it's really critical that we get them right. What does that look like? We at IPPR North have been calling for these panels to be actually consisting of community leaders, not dominated by councillors or former councillors, getting young people involved through this type of governance too, as one of the ways to try and join up, as you say, Jill, the gap between unitarised local authorities, which the kind of ballpark figure is that 500,000, which is a big local authority, especially when we compare internationally, and the community level. We also mustn't forget that there are parish and town councils, which I know they're much mocked, but actually form the very kind of rock bed of devolution and devolved power. And how can we strengthen those, or make sure that in areas where they want to be involved and active locally, that those are strengthened and then joined up with power at the unitary and mayoral level. So I think there's opportunity here, and we mustn't squander it.
So we know it's not perfect, but I am slightly concerned about that empowerment thing, because we are where we are largely because of that left behind and lack of people voting or taking part in our democratic processes. So I do think the empowerment thing and actually feeling you're being listened to is really important in how people actually respond to the ballot box or not. And I'd be interested from your point of view, both of your point of view, because obviously Localis and Claire's local economic strategies, it's really important, because some of my early training when I first got into work was very much about neighbourhood renewal. When after riots and whatever, people protect what they feel that they're involved in, or they feel that they don't destroy what they, and making feel, that whole thing around community is so important, that you like identity, you like where you live, you're proud of where you live. You want to live, work and rest and play in Manchester, Liverpool, wherever you choose. You're not at a disadvantage because you're here. It's an advantage because you identify, or you like. It's not a place you visit, or you get your school. You're basically engaged in that community, and that's the bit I think that the bill doesn't do. And the general question here is, what is missing, and what would you put in, I suppose? Sarah, I think first.
Yeah, I think part of this is about scale as well. If we're talking about democracy, when we're talking about GM scale, that's quite, yes, you've got a popular, populist mayor, if you like, leading that, but it doesn't really help when you're trying to understand how you're going to get social care for your aging relatives, or how your child's going to get a decent school, or any of the kind of practical day-to-day stuff. There needs to be a sort of human scale when it comes to accountability and to politics as well, and I think that's perhaps what we're risking in the kind of local reorganisation space, and this idea, this number picked from, I can't, there's not a lot of, substance behind it apart from the PwC report.
And yet we're all repeating it.
Exactly. I think it's, there's a real need to have that kind of more scalar interpretation of what's going on here. But I also think that with devolution in its current form, if devolution, if devolution is supposed to be at the cutting edge of what our modern democracy is, then why does it quite often feel very much like Westminster? When you look at the representation, when you look at the tactics, when you look at the way in which the English devolution model works, and I think that needs to be addressed in how those mayors encourage and support not just representative democracy, because I mean, let's look at the turnouts. The turnout for Greater Manchester wasn't even 30% at the last election. So I would like to see much more emphasis on participative democracy as well as representative. And I do think there is something to figure out here when we have these new structures in place, local government reorganisation. We've got something to sort out there in terms of not just how new services are going to be delivered, but where the money goes. Because for us at CLES, the Centre for Local Economies, what we do is follow the money, and we look at contracts, we look at procurement, we look at land and property, and we ask ourselves, how does the change in governance also change ownership? Because accountability and a sense of participation in a society does not just come from casting your vote every so often. It comes from a sense of ownership over the process, but also over the means of actually operating in society. The ability for you to go and speak to the person who's managing your aging relative in a care home. The ability to be able to pay to live well in a place. The ability to be able to have a decent job which will pay a good wage. Those are the types of questions that devolution needs to engage with at a human scale if it's to be fully accountable and actually kind of meaningful for people in the longer term.
Yeah. Jonathan?
Okay, big gaps in the devolution bill. Well, clearly anything around it, but the not unimportant issue of finance or funding or resourcing to make this happen, as if it's so if devolution is taking place somewhere altogether elsewhere, like in the metaverse or Second Life. That's quite a gap. And in terms of the accountability, ultimately, who is ultimately on the hook for this? I thought it was quite amusing during the levelling up years when all those red wall Conservative MPs were touting themselves. I'm going to be like the mini mayor of my constituent. Not that didn't, but had a lot of good being a glorified local authority caseworker. But who is it? The strategic authority, the local authority. I'd hazard in most of these things it will be the local authority which is doing this. But again, in terms of how we measure this, so we've got two different ways of doing it. We've got the local government outcomes framework, newly formed for councils to worry about, and the integrated settlement framework for strategic authorities. We did some work with our good friends at Core Cities and SIT for last year, looking at how if the billion-dollar question is to attract private investment into primarily our urban centres. How do you do it? Well, probably having one way of evaluating this would be good, and enabling that to happen. But it's going to ask the question, who is ultimately accountable? Now, if it's, as you said, in Parliament will take a view, I'm sure Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, the chair of the Public Accounts Committee, he'll have a view. What makes the integrated settlement so interesting is this kind of money that's kind of amputated directly from Whitehall budget lines, so 99 separate funding streams from 5 different departments, going straight to strategic authorities that prove that they're good enough with accountability. They've got the trailblazers already. It will be interesting how this happens. Are we going to have local public accounts committees with MPs, combined authorities, local authorities? Nobody particularly knows the answers. I think it's kind of, we're doing some work with local partnerships to study everything in its right place to try and get some answers on them. But clearly, we need probably less reliance on informal deals and more kind of formal ways of doing this, and having sort of standardising institutional checks so we have a better symmetry for accountability all across the piece.
Yeah, I mean, one of the points I make is something's going to go wrong, and then people are going to say, well, it's not me, Gulf, or it's who is it? And so there's a situation. So I think in the future, I think if you say what's missing from the bill, there's quite a lot, as we know, nobody's arguing there isn't. But it was a framework, it was something we can build on. The GIA bill, when that happened, there wasn't much in that either, but it's built, and it will evolve, I think. I suppose that goes back to the original exam question. It's not a revolution, is it an evolution that we're actually talking about? And also the other, because it sounds to say that devolution the solution. I think for me, yes, it's the answer. I think it's probably turning into an evolution. That doesn't mean that we can't. Evolution, I think, might move slower, but maybe it won't be stopped. And I don't think you can stop this. I think it's just got to be better. And I think we've got to really, that's the point of how we make it work, how we make it sexy, a term I often use, you know, to make it sort of appeal, to make sure that people do go and vote and know what they're voting for and why, because they can point to this or point to that, or you know, NPR, for example, great, but it doesn't make much difference to the here and now problem of everybody in this room who's got to travel on a train in the north at some point, probably later today, or unless you're actually living in central Manchester. So I think there's a lot there, but so this is another one on my list, but you know, picking up on what you've all said, with billions being directed into the north, mayoralties, and there are lots of money and a lot of power. There's no two ways about it. NPR, pride and place, go on and on. But how can we go further and faster to deliver much wanted change? And I think I'm just going to link that also in terms of what's missing. And yeah, Zoe, you mentioned the tourism levy. We talked about business rates. Innovative ways of raising money. Huge potential, I think, in the culture economy here, making it a place where people do identify that. But without, a long time ago, it was like fiscal, it won't work without fiscal devolution. And I know that people have different views of what that actually means. But as you said, if we have a chancellor, or we have a treasury, which feels that they're very holding on to those purse strings, and have said quite clearly that they don't want fiscal devolution, how do we actually really sort of square that circle if we haven't got, let's say, we haven't got really that feeling at the centre of somebody who's owning this agenda and driving this agenda? I think we did have that with our Manchester colleagues, but I said to Jim McMahon, but I don't think there's a big beast who's really, you know, with respect to everybody, you can't say, you know, John Prescott was a big beast, George Osborne was a big beast. We don't have a big beast owning this. I think that's what I would say. Zoe, I'm going to throw my diatribe at you.
I mean, I'm cautiously wanting of further fiscal devolution. I say cautiously because, of course, if we tomorrow change the tax system so that all taxes raised in a place would be kept in a place, we would exacerbate regional inequality, and that's the thing we all here hopefully want to much reduce and eliminate eventually. So there has, you know, it's one of those things that needs to be designed really well. But I do think the sort of slight rock and a hard place where we are with the devolution agenda at the moment, where people are expecting more and more of mayors, but actually the real powers and flexibilities they have are still quite limited and still, as you say, Jill, quite beholden to the centre, beholden to Treasury, means that they won't be able to deliver under the status quo what, you know, we all probably hope and expect. And I do think having ultimately control over the finances is a big step towards that. So I'm, you know, as I say, a bit cautious because it has to be designed really well in order not to entrench regional inequality, but ultimately I think has to happen because otherwise there is always going to be this sort of, you know, the parent-child relationship between the centre of government and the mayoralties.
Yeah, and I think there's also the local tension as well. So I'm worried about the growing tensions between those relationships and clarity about what's it for. Sarah and then Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Zoe about the need to avoid a race to the bottom, really. You know?
Yeah.
I think with the local government reorganisation, you know, there is something about how that encourages and supports collaboration between different places instead of, I think what we've seen a lot of the time in recent years, all the competition, which I think is kind of unhelpful. In terms of the big beast question, I would really like to get point where we do need support within Whitehall, and we do need, you know, politicians to take this seriously. But I think it would be really good if we weren't simply depending on, you know, a white man to lead us through the gates of, you know, future devolution. I mean, I would really like if the big beast that was pushing for this was the public itself, and it became part of the political conversation. So yeah,
I like that. I like the idea of the public driving that. And if that's real empowerment, and that is a revolution. Really, it's not an evolution, but it is this top-down, bottom-up, which again talked about this ad infinitum. But it's how you get that engagement in the first place is really excitement I talk about, you know, important jumping.
There's nothing for it but full-fledged revolution. As in, no, seriously, if you want this to change,
The industrial revolution.
friends of localism, friends of devolution, we must gather. We must gather outside Horse Guards Avenue, storm the particularly unfriendly facilities management entrance, go to the public finance management team, rip them all out, rip all their files out, and get them to start again. We looked at it for the local government association, fiscal devolution, how it works in those revolutionary northern European countries, Switzerland, Germany, the Netherlands. It's not a race to the bottom. These things equalise themselves on a regional, pan-regional basis. And it's not always devolution, sometimes it's just decentralisation, but it's that kind of fixed treasury mind, that treasury viewpoint, which will not be effaced unless there is an institutional revolution, seriously, to get them. The Netherlands isn't Venezuela, it's not Cuba. These are not madcap people. They do very sensible things, and they allow more productive economies and businesses and groups of businesses, skills, infrastructure, all the West to support more prosperous communities and local economies.
Yeah.
Revolution.
Yeah, well,
And just building on that, I think like you know, if ultimately we're maybe all slightly federalists who wouldn't mind if England was a more federal country, and then different places like we see in other countries, you have further fiscal devolution, and then you have a scenario where different regions specialise in different areas, and that's okay. And collectively we add up to something interesting as a country, but everywhere can have its own sort of emphasis. And I think it sounds like, despite our kind of some differences in opinion, that actually that's where we think it should end up.
yeah. So I think we've had I'm conscious of the time. I could carry on talking all night, but I'm not going to do that. But on my favourite subject, so thank you very much for indulging me. But I think there's a lot that's coming through here, and I hope you found it interesting. But I'm also interested in some of the things that we pose and haven't mentioned on just really throwing it out back to the audience on the actual exam question. Do you think it's alive and kicking? But also some of the other things around what's the barrier, what's slowing it down, is it being slowed down, what do we need? So I'm looking at a sea of hands up in the air wanting to ask a question to the panel. If not, there he is. Give me your name.
Hi, it's Alex Howell from the Local Government Association.
Hello, Alex. Welcome.
So I guess my question is, and I think Jonathan touched upon this with the point around, I think Jonathan touched on this with the point around geography and the metropolitan counties. I guess the context is that even with the priority programme, 35% of the country population won't have devolution, largely rural areas, even the priority programme, largely rural again. So I guess the question is, how viable, how effective do we think the current model of devolution is, or will be, for rural areas where there isn't perhaps an urban core to identify around?
Yeah, I think that's quite a big question, but I think the urban-rural thing, and also actually in areas like Yorkshire, where there's more than one city, I think there's a lot going on in that question, and you look like you're very keen to answer that.
Well, I was just going to say, we're doing quite a bit in York and North Yorkshire, and it is a very different, you know, it's a very different devolution proposition doing something there compared to GM or West Midlands. So, and I think the model that we've got of devolution is very much based on the GM, and also the kind of metrics around devolution that the Treasury want to see are also based on very much an urban model. So I think there is a really interesting passion, and I think a real opportunity to be able to think, look, rural areas have got huge amounts of opportunity, huge amounts of land, huge amounts of natural assets, and how can we rethink devolution to really match what's going on? And it's interesting in North Yorkshire, they've included, despite protestations from trades, they've included farming and food within their priority sectors because that's the reality for them. So,
Yeah, Jonathan.
Yeah, I guess Greater Manchester is the poster boy. Everyone's meant to replicate. We've got the sort of Brookings Institute, Bruce Catt's model of metro mayors, which is the nail which the Treasury hammer wants to hit every time. But even here, like, Lancashire's not going to get it. It's got struggling to devolution deal without the mayoral powers. It's not just unique to other parts of the country. It's like my ancestry is Cornish. It's bizarre that the government was insisting that they had to join forces with their enemies across the Tamar in Devon to get a deal. And I guess it goes to part of this sort of asymmetry. We've just got to realise we have a devolution system which is different in many places. It's metro versus retro. The retro areas will stay a country mile or two behind. And we do have the realities. I think the levelling up agenda was honest in that it recognised the reality of the Matthew effect, as in to those who have, more will be given to those. So I think the question going future is that how do you address this capacity gap between the regions? And maybe it's going to have to be the likes of Mark Rogers, West Midlands, Greater Manchester, offering skills, advice, experience to those areas that simply don't have it. You've also got to look at how different strategic authorities are resourced. Like West of England Combined Authority was a basket case, until it was being trying to be remedied now. When you compare the resources it has per capita compared to, say, West Midlands and Greater Manchester, that question pretty much answered itself.
there's a great phrase from Cornwall as well about this, where they talk about themselves as an exploded city, which I think is a good way of thinking about it.
The only other thing I would add to what's been said is that, of course, when you look at the geography of like the hyper-local, as we call it, governance, you know, the town and parish councils actually they're more often found in kind of more rural areas. And actually, I think the question for me is, let's not expect the mayoral model to kind of fix it all, but instead think of the balance between the mayoral tier, the hyper-local tier, and community governance. And maybe in rural areas, the answer will be more to do with those other tiers of government rather than expecting this kind of single figurehead to fix everything.
Any thoughts on that coming back? You, Alex? No, it wasn't Alex, was it?
Yeah.
It was so good. I thought, gosh, good. Yeah, I think there's all things. I love the retro versus metro. It's a good one. I'll
tell you what,
I might nix that. So and all other things. So I've got the whole thing around predictions. So we mentioned Keir Starmer earlier, May 26th, and I think I'm going to finish this session off because I think it's, since I actually wrote this, obviously it's only what day is it, the 22nd of January, things have moved at a pace, not least in Greenland, Venezuela, Let's Go, and World Peace and Davos, and all the rest is happening. But here in Manchester, it's still, we know that 2026 is going to be maybe the defining year for Keir Starmer's leadership. It may be a defining moment for Greater Manchester, and lots of things are going to happen. We do have the bill coming through, will be an act. We've got a lot to really think about. So I'm just going to do a very, very simple question, as I often do, which takes it's a harder one to answer. But will Starmer survive post-May 2026 and take us into the next general election? So who wants to go first on that? Then we'll put it to the
Why
audience.
don't you start the other side?
You start on the far right. I'm going to go for yes, because I don't think Labour are quite organised enough to pull this off.
Okay, I'm not commenting whether I agree or not, but I do. Anyway. Okay, Jonathan.
Well, the question is, does he deserve to? I think probably in fairness, as a political dud, he does deserve to. Maybe like, you've got to go to precedent. It's hard to unseat a sitting Labour Prime Minister, unless like Harold Wilson, the drink and the exhaustion gets the better. Keir Starmer's not a drinking man, doesn't have Lady Falkender berating him behind the scenes. So, and stubbornness is an instinct too. We shall see. Maybe the Burnham effect, or the internal coup, the Labour equivalent of the men in the grey suits, which the Conservative Party used to have. But clearly, everyone's braced themselves, in all honesty, post-May, where there will be elections held. It will be mainly reform coming through. Blame the public, voting public if you want, but maybe they don't have too many other great choices ahead of them. They've had enough. We shall see. Yeah, I say survival. That's because it's harder to unseat, but not out of particular merit.
Might do a subsidiary question to you as well, and to you so as well, but is, what do you think will be the upshot of reform, I suppose? I mean, is it a defining moment for them, and therefore, ergo, the Conservative Party as we know it?
I think for reform, I suspect it will be a high point, it'll be a flash in the pan. I think you need to watch what they're going to do.
Okay, Jonathan?
Well, clearly Nigel's giving everything to it, and the tide seems to be with them at the moment. Stranger things have happened for those who remember the SDP. You can get half the polling, and then everything falls apart. But no, there is. I think a sea change has happened, and post-May, it does reflect that reality.
Yeah. Okay, Zoe.
And I think this year international events will dominate and probably dictate who runs the government. And in terms of the second question on reform, I think they're already hitting the reality of what governing looks like at the local level. You know, we've seen down in the
Lots of
southeast,
nodding heads.
you know, what happens when actually you're put in charge of a local authority that has severe budget shortages and public services to deliver. And actually, in fairness, like, you know, we've seen a U-turn already from them on cutting council tax bills when they face the reality of governing. So I hope that, you know, if reform do appear in more councils from May onwards, that reality of governing and actually what the public needs in terms of support for the cost of living and support on public services, that will mean they change tack. I hope.
Okay, so there's only one thing for our panel to do, and that's to open our fortune cookies to see what's going to happen to us in 2026. There's all those others there.
They're not those trick ones.
Nick Trails had that one, but hopefully I can't even open it. I'm just going to the queue. I'll do mine first, because I'm under. Oh, this is good. You'll be rewarded for your kindness to others. Oh, that's nice.
Well, as I said at the beginning, I think, you know, this is going to be a good year, well, a good road ahead for Devo, and indeed, rough times are behind you.
Oh, that's good too, isn't it? These are lovely. Okay, what's yours?
You want me to go first?
Yes. Is it bad news?
I would enjoy peace and harmony in life.
Oh,
I'll take that.
Like Donald Trump.
And I've got knowledge is power.
Ooh, that's fun.
But of course, as a famous philosopher said, power also dictates knowledge.
Yeah. So we'll review this at another point, whether I'd be rewarded for my kindness and knowledge is power and all of those things that we've had. There are some more there to take forward to this early New Year's Eve, Chinese New Year celebration. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you to everybody, my team, Sam, and where are you, Eleanor, and everybody who's here. Shout out for Mick from the Devo Collective, where we bring all the best people together. This is about bringing network, having the conversation, doing exactly what's on the tin. Let's keep the conversation going. So when you're in the pub or talking to people, they might talk about this, that, and the other, but just try and connect it with their lives. It's not boring, I promise you. Look, you've all
You have to
stayed.
convince me.
So thank you. Can we put our hands together? Go and have a cup of tea, glass of prosecco, some Chinese beer or whatever you fancy, and have a little chat afterwards. But thanks always for coming, and for all of you online, thank you. If you're not asleep, au revoir. See you soon.